Presented by RomulusIT.com, offering remote support for common computer problems. Landry.Audio, listen, like, and subscribe. Today, we're speaking with Canadian Member of Parliament Pierre Poilievre, who will be our cover story in the next edition of the Canadian Business Quarterly, a link for which can be found in the description of this video. Very shortly, Canadians will go to the polls in a federal election to determine whether or not Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be granted a government for a third term. Mr. Poilievre has been good enough to give us some time and discuss his position as a Conservative MP and take us through the record of the Trudeau government. So, Pierre, as I mentioned, this will be of particular interest to Canadians across the country, but we also have a large audience of international listeners as well. With that in mind, I'll ask you to provide some context on the questions I'm going to ask to help others who may not be too familiar with the current Canadian political landscape. What I'd like to do today or tonight in your time is look at the record of Trudeau since he's come to power and some of these scandals. I can admit there are some positive, progressive bills that I thought have been quite good in a libertarian sense in some ways as well. But when you begin to stack up this record overall, it's quite shocking what they've been able to get away with and what they've proposed. And that's why I've asked you to join us here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So look, I'm originally from Calgary as well. So can I just ask, it's an interesting chat of how you were from Calgary as well, but you've now found yourself in a riding over in Ottawa.
Well, I think you have a French last name as well.
I do.
Landry.
Yes,
so do I, which is both of us would be kind of rare in Calgary, which is a not known for French speakers, but my father was one of them. He was born in a Saskatchewan French village named Leoville, and that's how I ended up with the name Pierre Poilievre, living in Calgary. My folks came from Saskatchewan to Alberta in 1977. I was born in 79, and I took an interest in politics when I was about 16 years old because I suffered a rotator cuff injury, which ended my short-lived athletics career and left me extremely bored and in need of something to do. So my mother took me to a progressive conservative meeting, and then I just became addicted to reading books about politics, history, economics, etc., and ended up with a political career. I moved to Ottawa in 2000 and roughly 2001 or two, I don't remember which one it was, and worked on the Hill, and then took a shot at Parliament in the southwest Ottawa riding of Nepean Carleton, and lo and behold, won it, and have been elected ever since.
Fair enough. I was thinking that that's a really good place to start. There's a lot of contention currently in Western Canada between the West and the East and the prairie provinces. And over the last few years, this has led to another movement, which a lot of us recognize are originally from Quebec, which is the Wexit Prairie movement. Do you want to just give us an overview of what's caused this motivation for an Alberta separatist movement?
Well, it's been the outright hypocrisy and frontal assault of the Trudeau government on Alberta's way of life and on its resource-based economy. And Trudeau has welcomed hundreds of millions of barrels of foreign oil into Canada off the east coast of the Atlantic. Tanker after tanker shows up and is delivered to the Irving refinery and St. John, New Brunswick, or other refineries in Quebec. And yet Trudeau has killed two major pipelines that would have allowed Western Canadians to get their oil to market, and left the province with a terrible discount on its oil. Western Canada Select is a blend of petroleum that is about $15 to $20 per barrel cheaper than the world price. Because we can't actually get our oil to world markets, and then are stuck selling all of it to the United States. Literally 99% of all Canadian oil exports go to the US because of Trudeau's effective blockade on the oil sands. And that has led unemployment to 8%. It is blowing a multi-billion-dollar hole in governmental revenues and in the local economy. And so naturally, Albertans are wonder, if their own national government is going to deliberately attack their economy while favoring foreign oil imports to Canada, then they wonder what future they have. And unfortunately, some people have turned to separatist movements that I don't believe is justified, even under the extremely unfair circumstances. But it is the result of Trudeau's policies and his posture towards the Western Canadian economy. Now, the solution to this is quite clear: is to stop importing foreign oil and use our own, and encourage the continued improvement in environmental standards in the Western Canadian oil sector, so that the resource can be harvested responsibly, even as we move towards a lower carbon global economy.
Mm. With Trudeau's record as well as being a progressive, I think you've touched on this. And what I find very fascinating is the fact that you talk about, Albertans aren't being allowed to pull this out of the ground, but at the same time, we're importing oil from, I guess, potentially how you would term it, less than desirable countries in the Middle East. Do you think that's kind of a bizarre hypocrisy?
Well, it is a hypocrisy. It's not bizarre for Trudeau. He has shown a great affection for dictatorships around the world. He praised Fidel Castro as a great revolutionary. He said that when asked what was his favorite government on planet Earth, he said that the communist dictatorship in China was the model he most preferred. So it's not surprising that he would favor foreign oil petro dictatorships like that in Saudi Arabia or Algeria or Venezuela over Canadian oil and gas production.
China's, I guess, a good way to segue through this. You had mentioned Trudeau's admiration for this. What do you believe is sort of the state of affairs between Canada and China now, and the withholding of Canadian citizens? I believe they were the first country to be approached for COVID vaccines. Where does it sort of leave us and the relationship between the Trudeau government and China?
Well, I think it leaves the Politburo commissaires in Beijing rolling around on the ground laughing at how idiotic and naive our government is. Of course, Trudeau, first of all, they've got two of our citizens hostage, so we shouldn't be doing business with them, period, until they release our people. Rather than taking a strong stand, Trudeau believed all of Beijing's lies about the early COVID pandemic. He actually attempted to sign a deal allowing for Canadians to buy the CanSino vaccine. You imagine anyone wanting to put something in their veins that was made by the communist regime in China. And as a result of that deal, we ended up missing out on signing on to get to the front of the list for vaccines made by reputable Western companies, and we then got our vaccines about 100 days late. So this sort of and it doesn't stop. He authorized military cooperation with the People's Liberation Army. He continues to give $250 million Canadian tax dollars to the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which is a China-controlled bank designed to re-establish the old ancient Silk Road. And he refuses to ban Huawei from Canada's 5G network, basically guaranteeing China would have espionage access to our most precious communications. So basically, he's doing whatever they tell him to do and putting our country at great long-term risk as a result.
You had mentioned the original lies of COVID with China. There seems to be alternative evidence coming out. And I don't want to get into any form of conspiracy theory, but do you believe, and I guess what you've seen, is there any evidence now, or is it truthful to sort of believe that COVID is lab grown and was part of some sort of international funding program by multiple nations?
Well, we don't know. We want answers to that very question. That's why we need a full forensic investigation into the origins of the virus. But we know that China lied about the very existence and severity of the virus at the outset, which denied the world valuable response time we could have used to contain its early spread. So we know that the government in Beijing has lied before. We don't. I obviously haven't been able to conduct my own investigations. I'm merely a member of Parliament in Canada, but I think we do need an independent and rigorous investigation with open access to all the evidence, including the Wuhan lab, let us get to the truth of the origins of the disease.
As I mentioned, I'm quite far removed now. I'm over in Australia, even though I am a Canadian citizen. Trudeau generally seems to be quite popular, and a lot of people don't sort of read under the surface of what's been happening within Canada. One of the people that seems to have been directly affected by him, who's rose to an immense level of popularity, is Dr. Jordan Peterson, who everyone knows. Can you just give me, take us back in time and explain to us some of these laws that Trudeau began to pass related to things like free speech that really kicked off the fact that Dr. Peterson would not acknowledge, I think, people and their gender preferences, which I believe ended up getting him fired from the University of Toronto, which led to this extreme growth in his popularity, and how that relates to Canadian bills and laws at the moment?
Well, first of all, Trudeau is not that popular. In the last election, he only got 33% of the vote. So to say that he's a popular leader is just factually wrong. The media, he's very popular with the media, of course, because he's a liberal, but he's not popular with the general public. His approval ratings have been consistently very low, lower than modern day US presidents, for example. And he's currently very unpopular again. I think he's running around 30% in the polls. So, I mean, if you went around to the average comparable democracy and you said, Joe Smith is really popular, he has a 30% approval rating, most people would laugh and say, really, 30%? That's not much of an approval rating. So I think he's unpopular. He survived in the last election because he lucked out on the distribution of votes, got a lot of seats with very few votes. And that's despite having near unanimous support by the press gallery. It's a pretty incredible achievement to be unpopular when all of the major media outlets are basically campaigning for you nonstop. But he's managed to do that. On the issue of free speech, Trudeau's most direct attack on free speech was a bill called C-10, which would give the Canadian telecommunications regulator the power to control what you see and say online. Basically, the pretext for the bill was that it would protect Canadian content. That the fear supposedly is that Canadians will lose all identity if they're not sort of force-fed, approved, government-approved content, and if they're just allowed to watch whatever they want on YouTube or listen to whatever they want on Spotify, for example. So he thought would regulate and make sure that certain kinds of Canadian content would be promoted in the algorithm, and certain other kinds of content would be banned altogether. And of course, this is censorship. There's no other democracy in the world that does this. There was a major backlash, of which I was a part, and we were able to prevent the bill's passage. One liberal appointed senator said the bill was so bad it needed to have a stake driven through its heart. Again, this is not even a conservative. It's an author, an artist who was appointed to the Senate by the Liberals, worried that free speech would be under attack. Now, there was a coalition of broadcasting corporations and entertainment lobbyists who backed it, of course, because it was going to give them an advantage. And many of them produce garbage and wanted that garbage to be promoted by the state. And that's why they were so anxious to see this bill pass. But the more nefarious reason was that Trudeau saw it as an opportunity to begin regulating what people get to see online, in order to ensure that they get more, left-wing liberal propaganda that is approved by the state and therefore promoted in a regulatory scheme that gets to manipulate the algorithms. So we fought back, and that is one of the big issues at stake in this election.
So Bill C-10 that you mentioned with that, does that also tie in, or is that sort of separate to the changes that were made to the Canadian Journalism Fund? Because that's what I remember, sort of the government looking to fund pre-approved media outlets who would carry their message effectively.
Yeah, that is a similar issue. That wasn't part of C10. That was part of an early liberal media bailout. Basically, they said the media is in trouble. Well, why is the media in trouble? Well, the cost of production and distribution of journalism has plummeted. Well, that doesn't sound like a problem. That sounds like a solution. All the old subsidies we used to give journalists was because the cost of production and distribution was really high and they needed help getting over that cost hurdle. Problem solved. The internet and devices like the ones that we're speaking on today make it very cheap to develop journalism and to distribute it. But of course, the real concern is that low cost has led to more competition. And so they're trying to reverse the competitive phenomenon of the internet and go back to having a very small number of privileged journalistic voices dominating the debate. And it kind of reminds me of Frederick Bastiat. He was talking about the old dirigiste controlled French economy, where these small special interest groups were able to dominate particular sectors by effectively having the crown ban people from entering those sectors. And there's too many butchers, then the butcher won't make enough profit. So let's limit the number of butchers you can have, limit the number of bakers you can have, and limit the number of blacksmiths you can have, and then there'll be just enough that the favored few can make a profit. He said, well, listen, I think we should go even further with this. Jokingly, he said, I think we need to ban windows. Because if we ban windows, then we'll create more work for candle makers, because people will be dark all day long inside. They won't get any natural light. They'll have to buy more candles, and we'll ban the competition that the sun brings to the candle maker. And this is going to create wealth and jobs for candle makers everywhere. So he said it obviously jokingly, but it was to illustrate how silly is this idea of trying to shut out competition in order to profit a certain small gilded few. We who believe in free markets believe that we should, open the windows, let the sunshine pour in, and let everybody have the fresh air and a bright light of an open window, rather than a protected oligarchy that shuts out the light and closes off the air.
Fair enough. I will move over to that in a second, because I think there's probably a lot to talk about the relations of that with SNC-Lavalin and some of the things there. Before we move on to that, though, I also noticed that there's Bill C-36, which I believe is related to hate speech. That's separate. Does that tie in with that? How far have you seen this government sort of push the idea that what an individual can say is up to the government and not that individual?
Very far. I mean, Trudeau is regularly warning that criticism of him will result in great danger to all of society, and therefore he and his minions in the state should have exceptional powers to control what individuals say and see online. Of course, that is antithetical to a free and democratic society, but this is sort of the nature of socialism. Once you start controlling the economy, then you need to start controlling people's speech and their politics as well, because people will not freely vote for their own impoverishment for very long unless the state imposes it politically. And so you see him trying to erode basic democratic and basic constitutional and democratic liberties in order to protect his narrow control and that of a small aristocracy of woke liberals at the expense of everyone else.
When you sort of view Canada in the lens against other Western nations, I guess like, Australia, clearly America, Great Britain, England, etc., Singapore, and those sorts of countries, do you believe any other Western nation has moved this barometer so far? Or is this really the mandate of Trudeau now in shutting down people's ability to speak freely?
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I'd hesitate to comment on how the free speech debate is going in other countries because I'm not on the ground there.
Okay. So as I said, we want to move it. There are some big scandals that pretty much for a lot of people, over here fell under the radar. Most people that I speak with internationally, and travelers, kind of recognize the Justin Trudeau who smiles, goes on trips to India, that sort of thing. So when we look at 2019 and SNC-Lavalin and Jody Wilson-Raybould, do you want to? I'm just going to open this up to you because a lot of people over here are completely unfamiliar, with some of the big scandals that were familiar to Canadians.
Yeah, look, I mean, this one for a so-called woke prime minister is a real whopper because let's go to the origin of it. SNC-Lavalin was accused of stealing over $100 million from some of the poorest African people in the world. They were alleged to have bribed the Gaddafi family with prostitutes, yachts, and other benefits in order to defraud the Libyan people of over $100 million. So you'd think that a woke, anti-colonial, modern progressive would be outraged by a Western company stealing from poor African people. Trudeau wasn't not only not outraged, but he actually pressured his Indigenous Attorney General to have the charges dropped and a special agreement signed that would allow the company to avoid even pleading guilty. They pay a small fine, apologize, promise not to do it again. She said, hell no, we live in a system of laws, rule of law, not the law of rulers. They should face a prosecution and let the legal process play itself out. So he fired her for that. And here you have this ultra woke liberal leftist protecting a corporation that had stolen from the world's poor. And then when an Indigenous woman stood up to him, he fired her. This all sort of runs a diametric cross purposes to the narrative we're told about these woke progressives. And in the end, he claimed it was all about protecting jobs, that if the company were convicted, all these people would be out of work. Well, they were in the end convicted. They pled guilty and nobody lost their job. So it wasn't about protecting workers. It was about protecting a liberal-linked multinational corporation with a long-standing track record of corruption from legal accountability. Trudeau was personally found guilty by the ethics commissioner of improperly advancing a private interest in the affair. But it really stands as a glowing example of his personal hypocrisy and utter moral failing that he ever ventured down that road in the first place.
And I'm told that he was the first sitting prime minister ever to break federal conflict of interest rules. What does that even mean then, if there's nothing to be reprimanded for in this?
Well, he was found guilty twice, actually, once in this case and another time for accepting $250,000 worth of vacation gifts from someone with whom he had government business. So the Aga Khan was seeking a $15 million government grant from Trudeau, and he offered Trudeau a $250,000 worth of private island vacations, which Trudeau accepted, and the Aga Khan's foundation got the $15 million grant. So it's an incredible case of corruption. In most cases, in most countries, it would have been prosecuted criminally. Taking a $250,000 vacation from someone who's seeking a grant from you is clearly against not only the law, but against the criminal code. He managed to avoid criminal charges, but was found guilty of breaking the Ethics Act.
And I had also read, in addition to the SNC-Lavalin scandal, there have been other women that have been pushed out of the Trudeau government as well, despite him considering himself a feminist.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can go down the list. There's one case after another. I won't go into them all, but what you see with this guy is that there's a lot of glowing woke rhetoric, but when you see his personal conduct, it is always the exact opposite. He uses women and minorities for his own political advantage, but then ultimately engages in hostile political conduct towards them.
Mm. Moving on, I guess, from scandals to scandal, we have the We scandal. And this is where, from far away watching on YouTube, this is where I have really seen you sort of come to light through, these investigations. Do you want to tell people what this is? It's quite significant, and I guess their footprint within the charitable sector and how they mutually benefit from this.
Yeah, I mean, the scandal there was that Trudeau's family suddenly started getting these speaking fees from the We charity soon after he became Liberal leader. And the We charity is the sort of, I don't know, for anyone who might not have followed them, they're sort of this pop culture charity. They hold these evangelistic youth gatherings with, thousands of screaming kids and celebrities. And there's a lot of, change the world rhetoric. And there's been a lot of scrutiny about what they actually do, what good they actually produce with the millions of dollars they raise. And this scrutiny led to Justin Trudeau's family because they had paid his mother and his brother and his wife a total of $500,000 for speaking fees and travel expenses. And Trudeau then approved a $500 million grant to the organization to run a program for paid volunteership. So, obviously it's an oxymoron. Volunteers don't get paid. Volunteers don't get paid, they volunteer. And so when you heard the program, people heard about the program, they're just like, first of all, how does this even make sense? And then we found out that the We charity had gotten a sole sourced contract to run it worth $500 million. And then after that, we found out that the Trudeau family had been paid by that organization $500,000. So the Trudeau family got $500,000 from We, and the We organization got $500 million from Trudeau's government. So it's like a big self-licking ice cream cone. Anyway, so he gets caught. The whole program is canceled. Trudeau says, shucks, I really should have no, I should not have been involved in the decision to grant this money, but I didn't do anything wrong. His finance minister was forced to resign over it because of his involvement. The finance minister had 2 major trips funded by the We charity to, I think it was to Kenya and El Salvador or Ecuador. And then he got involved in giving them a grant. So he had to resign and was found guilty of breaking the law. So, you just have these seedy cases of corruption that have engulfed the Trudeau government again and again.
Now, I know it's quite late over there for you, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. One of the other areas that I've seen you speak quite passionately about is the area of business, small business, and allowing people really to get on with their lives and try to create some wealth for themselves. Before we get into small business, I remember I had read maybe a year or two ago as well that there was another bill that the Liberals were looking at passing that had to do with environmental legislation in the face of new business. And it was something along the lines of, if you were out to go create some, virtually anyone with any idea of saying that this might have some sort of environmental impact could stall or kill your project or your business dead before it went through the process. Can you take me through that? And it sounds detrimental to the ability for someone to try to create wealth or business for themselves.
Well, everybody agrees with environmental protection, but there are cases where governments have to say, no, you can't go ahead with this particular project if it's the cost of the environment is not worth the benefit to the economy. But there's no reason that it should take 7 years or 10 years to get an answer to that question. Other countries can turn around answers in less than 1 year. What does that mean? It means that money goes where it can get to work quickly. Here in Canada, we've become one of the slowest places on earth in which to get anything done. We're ranked 36 out of 37 OECD nations when it comes to the time it takes to get a building permit. So you want to build a warehouse in Toronto, you have to wait 170 days longer than you would in the average American metropolis. And so what does that mean? Well, the money goes to the US or Ireland or Switzerland or Singapore or any other place where things get done quickly. And that's one of the reasons why, we do not have, our mining sector is falling behind the rest of the world. We should be leading the charge mining polysilicon for solar panels and lithium for electric car batteries, and getting our ethical and clean energy to market. But we are falling behind because we are becoming increasingly known as a place where money goes to die, where things don't get done, where you sit in a queue, a bureaucratic queue. Now, that really doesn't hurt multinational corporations. They just move their money elsewhere. It hurts the worker because it means our workers don't get the jobs and wages some other country does. We just import the products. We pay for it with debt. We borrow from the world to buy from China. They get the money. We get the debt. It's a lose-lose for us. What we have to do is unleash the free enterprise system to make this the fastest and easiest place on earth in which to do business. That's how we'll get cash pouring back into our economy. Make this a place where you're rewarded rather than punished for growing.
What do you think has changed with younger generations? When you've used the word wokeism a lot, and we've seen the demonstrations on the streets. Why do you think generally young people, at least in the media and what we see, there seems to be a change in attitude of not really getting up and doing it yourself, and sort of more of a reliance on the government to take care of them? Any insights or opinions on this?
Well, I think that's somewhat true, but I do meet a tremendous number of entrepreneurial young people. I think that's a caricature that the woke left likes to play, but I think the average young person wants to get out and build things, make stuff, launch a business, take some risks, and get ahead. And that's why I think conservatism will be much more appealing to youth than the establishment might realize. I mean, look at the explosive growth in online investing, in cryptocurrencies, in the sharing economy, Uber, Airbnb, and countless other innovative sectors that entrepreneurial sectors that are really in liftoff right now. That says to me that youth around the world are interested in entrepreneurship. We just need governments to get out of the way and allow the free enterprise system to open up those opportunities for them.
Fair enough. And I guess as we begin to close down, what do you see as the motivation for Trudeau calling an election so early? Obviously, he expects to win it, even if it's minority. But what do you think has forced this push at the moment?
Look, I think he thought, oh, he'll just grab a majority because people are still afraid of COVID, and he thinks that having given away all kinds of money, that people are going to be wonderfully grateful. Thank you so much, Justin, for your benevolence, and we're just going to make you a majority prime minister. I think that's how he saw it. I think he also wanted to get it out of the way before the real economic consequences of his monstrous borrowing manifest themselves, or before more scrutiny into how he spent the COVID money comes to light. The Auditor General in this country is looking deep into the COVID spending. I suspect we'll find some very ugly revelations. And I think Trudeau wants the election over before any of that happens. So all of those self-interested reasons motivated the early election call less than halfway into his mandate. And I think it's backfiring. He's plummeted about 10 points in the polls since he called the election, and now, according to some polls, is actually behind. So he could be in some real trouble.
Fair enough. And finally, as we close down, what does the road out of COVID, in your opinion, look like in Canada?
Paychecks. We need to unleash the productive forces of the free enterprise economy to generate paychecks, growing paychecks with a real dollar that is no longer devalued by inflation. Right now, we have central banks around the world in general, but also in Canada in particular, printing cash like crazy, and that's eating up the value of the dollar. We need to put an end to the money printing. Stop creating cash and start creating the stuff cash buys. Build more homes, grow more food, get our energy to our consumers. That's how you actually increase the value of our paychecks, by creating the stuff that cash buys rather than just creating cash. So make more, cost less, paychecks, not debt.
Fair enough. Pierre, thanks very much for your time. My mother wanted to make sure that I said hello on her behalf. She's a big fan, and she was
Excellent.
very pleased. She's still in Calgary and very happy that I had the chance to do this over in Chestermere. So,
that's excellent. Chestermere, not too far from where I grew up. I was in Shaughnessy, way down in the south end there. So anyway, please give her what's that?
I went to Bishop Carroll, so I know those areas of the south fairly well.
You did?
So,
okay. I went to Scarlett and Henry Wisewood.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So great. Well, listen, hopefully I'll see you in Calgary sometime when you're back visiting from Australia.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jesse.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This episode is brought to you by Romulus IT, offering fast, affordable remote support for common computer problems, including troubleshooting, health checks, virus removal, and software support. Visit RomulusIT.com to get your computer back on track.